The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Peace be with you. It's an honor to pray with you all and for you all today. O giver of creation, O Lord, keeper of covenants, O God who has spoken through your many and varied prophets, O Lord of sacrificial and redeeming love, our true source of truth, beauty, and goodness. In every age, land, faith, tradition, and tongue, you have guided us in the way of peace. When we say shalom, when we say as-salam alaikum, when we say la paz seat contigo, when we say peace be with you, we begin our encounter by invoking for each other a divine peace. Lord, may these elected servants encounter each other today and every day in peace. A tongue sharpened for verbal battle and a war of words is not going to promote or sow lasting peace. Instead, put on their tongues and in their hearts the true spirit of peace be with you. Then, for the common good, may they be diligent in pursuing peace and vigilant in protecting it. As these men and women gather in service to all the people of Minnesota, may they be mindful that true peace, lasting peace, is not born of power overcoming weakness or might making right or of merely temporary advantage. Teach us, Lord, that the peace that endures must be both an unarmed and a disarming peace. And so, God of peace, watch over these representatives in their work today, this week, this session. Guide them toward making this capital a house of peace. In every encounter, may they diffuse hostility through dialogue. And may your divine peace, that unarmed and disarming peace, be promoted, protected, and praised. And may we all go forward in peace. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Deacon Kevin Connolly from the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis in St. Paul, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Momonty Hiltsley.
Go ahead.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
Momani Hiltsley, present.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 94th Session, 2026, 56th Legislative Day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Monday, April 13th, 2026.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Comparison reports. A copy of this order of business is online. If there is no objection, the motions will prevail. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail and the substitutions will be made. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business is on your desk and online. If there is no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. Second reading of Senate files.
Second reading of Senate File number 3958.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House Files 4970 through 5017.
First reading House files 4970 through 5017. Messages from the Senate.
A message from the Senate, Madam Speaker. I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate files herewith transmitted. Senate file number 3622, 3637, 4339, and 4455.
First reading of Senate files.
First reading of Senate File number 3622, an act relating to real property. Feist moves that Senate File number 3622 and House File number 3459, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
First reading Senate File number 3637, an act relating to transportation. Joy moved that Senate File number 3637 and House File number 3844, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
First reading Senate File number 4339, an act relating to utilities. Kraft moved that Senate File number 4339 and House File number 4233, now on the General Register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
First reading Senate File number 4455, an act relating to local government. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Taxes.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
NISCA from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, April 20th, 2026, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bills. House File numbers 2358, 3453, 3496, 3593, 3621, 3629, 3676, 3762, 3768, 3769, 3782, 3825, 3826, 3827, 4133, 4425, and 4467, and Senate File number 3832.
Announcement by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. Pursuant to Rule 1.15C, a message from the Senate has been received announcing requesting concurrence by the House to amendments offered to the Senate to the following House File number 1410.
Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions at the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail.
Mueller and Novotny move that House File number 3230 be recalled from the Committee on Public Safety, Finance, and Policy and be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Mueller, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is going to be a bill that is related to security, legislative security, Capitol ground security, judicial security. So although it's House File 3230, that was the vehicle bill for this. So if you look it up, we adopted a DE in public safety related to security, and so it's a very important bill. We want to make sure we can get it to Ways to talk about the funding that's in that bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Novotny, to the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as Representative Mueller said, we need to get this to Ways and Means. This is a bill that we've put a lot of work into, and we have come to agreement on this bill and the funding. I appreciate your support.
Any further discussion to the motion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails.
Frazier moves that House File number 3475, now on the General Register, be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
I recognize the member, Representative Frazier, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I was not quick enough on the draw. I will be withdrawing this motion.
Motion has been withdrawn.
Fair enough. Pursuant to House Rule 4.30, Bakeberg moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File number 4384 be recalled from the Committee on Ways and Means, be given a second reading, be placed on the General Register.
I recognize a member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's my motion. House File 4384 is a training bill for abusive head trauma. We heard it in Children and Families. At that time, there was a potential for a fiscal note. The fiscal note came back with no cost. I've spoken with both chairs.
Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is correct. We have had these conversations. There is no cost. We are okay with this motion.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. There's a motion at the desk. The clerk will report the motion.
Long moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File number 32 be recalled from the Committee on Finance and Policy, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. House File Bill 32 is an important bill related to youth mental health. The author has been changed to Representative Smith, and I would defer to Representative Smith to present the bill.
I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Smith, to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I was preparing my speech on this motion and on this bill, I was in this chair. This is when we weren't on the floor. It was quiet. And then, as they often do, a class made their way down into the gallery up there. I think middle schoolers, I couldn't quite tell, making their way up there. Normally wouldn't notice it, but because of the stats that I'm about to read to you about our children in Minnesota, I couldn't stop thinking about those faces that I had seen come in, excitedly whispering, you know how kids are in this area. Statistically, 1 in 5 children, members, will struggle with a mental health problem. And many of those children who struggle with a variety of mental health conditions will struggle with thoughts of suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for people 10 to 24 in Minnesota. Of course, nationally, you know, number one is gun violence, including suicides and accidental deaths, as well as homicide. What this bill does, House File 32, is try to reach those children who are struggling with mental health before it reaches a tragic end. And more specifically, that those families who want to get their children the help that they need are not brought into bankruptcy because of wanting to help their children. House File 32 prohibits health insurance providers from requiring co-payments for children's mental health services. And I want to talk about the two parties that are involved in that transaction here when we're talking about health insurance providers requiring co-payments. First and most importantly, I want to talk about Minnesota families. Every single one of us are talking to Minnesota families who are on an incredibly tight budget and who have probably tightened that budget this year. Then they find out that one of the most precious things in the world to them, their child, is struggling with something incredibly serious. They may have known about it, they may have had signs, maybe they're surprised, maybe something happened at school, but all of a sudden, the world is much different, and their child needs help. However, their health care plan that they are already paying premiums on every single month that are rising, that they're struggling to pay, most likely, also requires them to do co-payments for this new form of treatment that their child needs. And these treatments can be expensive, members. Co-pays for mental health services in Minnesota, and remember, these are people who are already paying the premiums for these plans, can range for individual therapy sessions from $20 to $75 per session. And then a psychiatric evaluation is necessary every so often, can be between $50 and $100. And then any medical management appointment to try to schedule and figure this out can cost between $10 and $50. And of course, to actually treat mental illness, as all of us know, you need multiple of these treatments. Speaker, could I ask for members to take their conversations off the floor? Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Members, please take your conversations to the alcove or to the retiring Representative Smith.
Thank you. While we're paused, I should have said at the beginning, I do want to request a roll call on this motion.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. So we're talking about this family, right? Tight budget. They're now looking at what this is going to cost. Their doctor, let's just say, and this is a low amount of treatment, that your child needs help. They need at least one weekly visit with a therapist, a monthly psychiatric evaluation so we can see how they're doing, talk them through this once a month. So one thing a week and then once a month. That's going to cost that family $3,500 that they were not planning on. What working-class Minnesota family can afford an unforeseen $3,500 cost in their budget? But also, what good parent wouldn't make that payment for their child? I mentioned the other party in this room. It's insurance companies. Health insurance companies like Blue Cross and Blue Shield, as an example. They have a total revenue of $10.4 billion, and whose CEO last year got a 34% salary increase, making a total of $4.3 million in 1 year. I think everyone can agree that healthcare costs are too high in this country. And the profits of that industry, unfortunately, as we have to call it, are going to the wrong places. And the people of Minnesota are never going to be served by this legislature or any body if they are listening to the voices of those health insurance companies above the voices of Minnesota families that are struggling with costs and rising costs in healthcare. This bill doesn't change the whole system, but it means a hell of a lot for the families that are struggling to pay for mental health treatments for their children. We can do this, members. We have the power to do this. That when families hear that their child needs mental health resources, they don't have to think about dollars and cents. They just have to think about helping their child. We can make that decision. And finally, I want to speak directly to this side of the room, because I've sat in this chair now for years, a part of many discussions after a tragedy. And while we vehemently disagree on common sense gun legislation, where we often talk about finding common ground is that children need more mental health resources, that is part of this picture to heal this situation. You claim that gun control measures won't work because gun violence is a mental health issue. You say investing in health care, mental health care, will help our kids stay safe. That's what House File 32 will do. Expand those services in our state. If you meant what you said, then this is an easy green vote. If maybe that was an excuse for something else, might go another way. Please vote yes on House File 32. Let's get our kids mental health care that they need.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Leader Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, I was a little puzzled just pulling this up and looking at the procedure in here, so I was wondering if Representative Smith would yield to a question.
Representative Smith will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, I noticed that that you've been changed to be the chief author as of today, and Representative Stevenson was stricken as an author. Who was the chief author before today for House File 32?
Representative Smith.
I think you just said that. Representative Stevenson was the chief author, and now I'm the chief author.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, if you would yield for another question.
Representative Smith will yield. Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, maybe I should be asking Representative Stevenson the question then, but I noticed this is referred to the Commerce, Finance, and Policy Committee, and there's never been a hearing on this bill in Commerce. Do you know why there has not been a hearing in any of the days that either Chair O'Driscoll or Chair Cagle have had the gavel in the Commerce Committee?
Representative Smith.
So clarify a couple things. I've been a co-author on this bill, I think, since last year. So I've been on this bill for a while. And as is normally the case in the House, our leaders don't necessarily carry a lot of bills. So that's why I'm carrying this bill. I'm happy to do it. I believe in it. As to the question on commerce, where I also sit, I believe Chair O'Driscoll was about to stand and potentially tell you why that might be. I won't speak for him. I guess I would say generally he is not in favor of these sort of bills. I think that's fair to say. And that's why it wasn't heard on that side.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it looks like Leader Stevenson has left, so maybe Chair Cagle could answer my question if Chair Cagle would yield for a question.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Niska, we only had half the gavels that we would have to normally hear bills. And, we squeezed as much into that time as we possibly could because that's what we do. We want to get our work done. We didn't have meetings a couple days last week or this week. And so I did as much work as I possibly could in the time frame I was given. Excuse me.
Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, to the people of Minnesota and to members, if you just look on House File 32, it was introduced, as would be implied by the low number, on February 10th, 2025. Now, that was a time in which Democrats did not have co-chairs. That was shortly after Democrats finally showed up work in this place. But there have been a lot of opportunities for Co-Chair Cagle to have heard this bill if it was, in fact, an urgency. And, I think there are some things we can do about mental health. This may, in fact, be a worthwhile thing. It is something that could have pretty serious impacts in the push and pull of our overall health insurance landscape. As I served on the Commerce Committee, whenever we put mandates in one area, it has costs in other areas that go across all Minnesotans. That's something that we have to look at carefully. That has been a bipartisan view in the past. We have, in fact, mandate review processes on the mandates that we put into our health insurance. So that's why it would be important to actually have hearings on healthcare mandates before we pass it. This isn't ready to go today. It's not, and the reason it's not ready to go is because this all-Democrat bill was never heard, even when Democrats had the gavel in the Commerce Committee. So, members, we don't need to play around with an urgency on a bill that Democrats chose not to hear in the Commerce Committee. Members, vote no.
I recognize a member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Representative Smith, thank you for bringing this thought forward. Members, I'm just going to tell you right out of the chute, vote no on this. Leader Niska is exactly right. There was an ample opportunity this session. Representative Smith does sit on the committee, and the committee does effective work. We really do very effective work when we work together. And this bill had never been brought to my attention, nor to Chair Kegle's attention, as a bill that needed to be heard. As a matter of fact, when we wrapped up the policy deadline, Chair Cagle just mentioned a few moments ago that we had a few days that we didn't meet. And the reason we didn't meet is we're on finance, not policy. And the 3 days that the Democrats had the gavel after the policy deadline, they heard at least 4 or 5 bills on each of those days, none of which was this bill that we're talking about here today, after deadline. And we were told that these are important bills, they're going to go to rules, and hopefully we can get a waiver on those. Well, apparently this wasn't one of those important bills because it wasn't brought to my attention or to Chair Kegle's attention about how important this is. And so again, no hearings on it, all of a sudden dropping it out of the sky. Let's just pick up with the work now that we're done with committees and just bring it to the House floor on this particular bill when the bill author, or I should say the new bill author, is actually on the committee. Now, some things that we did vote on and did bring up if we're concerned about insurance and insurance coverage in the state of Minnesota, and that is the extension of the reinsurance program in the state of Minnesota. Now, that program is scheduled to terminate here in the state in 2028. And I reminded the members of the committee that the way that things are playing out right now, that the co-chairs in the House, the chair in the Senate of the Commerce Committee, and the lead in the Commerce Committee in the Senate, all 4 of those people are collectively walking out and retiring at the end of this year. And I said, I think what we need to do is we need to set the stage for asking for a 1332 waiver again from the federal government to be able to keep the reinsurance program alive. And we brought 2 different bills forward, and they failed on party lines. That means right now, because committee's done, and it means that because we don't have this included anywhere or moving on its own or moving anywhere right now, that Minnesotans can expect a 25 to 35 to 40% increase in their premiums in the individual market. That would have been a great urgency to bring up today to preserve the individual market in the state of Minnesota. But again, as I said, we voted in committee. It died 10-10 because we didn't have any Democrats who were willing to support it at that point. I'm leaving. I am one of those 4 people that I mentioned, and I am trying to set the table for the legislature and the people in the state of Minnesota to preserve the individual insurance market. Now, who buys in the individual market? That'd be people who are entrepreneurs who are starting a business and separated from their employment. They'll go to MNsure and they'll look for coverage for themselves and for their family. Or people who have retired early.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
And what we're looking at is the importance of getting this bill taken care of and keeping it moving.
Confining remarks to the
so what we'd like to do is we'd like to be able to make sure.
Is your question a parliamentary inquiry?
No, it's a point of order. Right now we are on the debate around House File 32, and this is off topic to House File 32. So it's Mason's 101.
Members, remember to keep your conversation to the suspension of rules for House File 32. Representative O'Driscoll, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm not surprised that I was interrupted because it's a very uncomfortable conversation for the Democrats to be having today, that I pushed this boulder up the hill last year by myself. But I also noticed that there were a lot of folks who took credit for that work last year when we were able to extend the reinsurance program. So if we want to do the right thing, it's vote yes on asking for authorization for reinsurance, not bringing up bills that the author could have asked for a hearing on from either myself or the co-chair, and he sits on the committee. The little theatrics going on here today to try to distract you from other things that are happening. But ladies and gentlemen, you definitely want to make sure that we get the reinsurance program reauthorized, because that is going to be a tough conversation for folks to have in this room or on the campaign trail, telling people that you said, yeah, it was more important to play games than it was to actually preserve your insurance. And could you please vote for me again? Because I really think I've earned your vote. That's not going to play real well in Peoria or in St. Cloud or in Sartell or in any of our communities across the state. So thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to be able to clarify what's been happening and not happening in the Commerce Committee in the House this year.
I recognize the member from Ramsey, Representative Curran.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, Representative Smith, for highlighting the importance of mental health in the context of what we're here to do in the legislature. We have limited time anyway, and we are running even shorter as each day passes, and we need to get something done together to help protect kids. And when we talk about healthcare mandates, I just want to be really clear about what this bill actually does. During the enthralling debate about committee functions and procedural motions, I was able to read the entire thing multiple times. And what this does is ease families from the mandates that they have from their insurance companies to access the health care that their children need. So the question becomes, are we willing to relieve mandates for families so that their kids can just get the health care that they need, get the mental health care that they need? No questions asked, no worries. It's just there and they don't have to worry about it. Or are we concerned of getting in the way of the way that healthcare businesses run? Is that what we're really, is that why we're not willing to entertain even the conversation about children's mental health care? That's what we should be talking about. Nobody's here to talk about process. That's another distraction from something that is critical to the work that we do. And I do think that when we have debates like this, we absolutely should debate the merits of the bill, what Minnesotans are asking for, what Minnesotans are struggling with, and recognize that the clock's running out. We've had a lot of procedural arguments in here. It would be great if we could just come to an agreement that families should no longer have to worry that are they going to fill their gas tank that week, or is their kid going to get the mental health care they need so that they don't land in the emergency room again? These are real questions that families are asking, and this is a real opportunity to help them. Please vote green.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Cagle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was choking on a Milky Way that was up at the, I got at the chief clerk's desk. So, but I do want to kind of circle back a little bit. You know, when we started the Commerce Committee this year, and it's been a joy to work with Chair O'Driscoll. It's really been a great experience. And going into that process, we had set some parameters down and kind of knew where each other stood. And so I had a lot of members approach me for requests for mandates, which I think of it more as care for people. And so because we knew that we wouldn't have any GOP members voting to expand care to Minnesotans, we decided to use the time that we could to work through bipartisan bills or bills that we thought we could really get good support on. And so that's why I do support this motion, because this is a way for us to actually hear this bill that we knew wouldn't have a chance in committee because of the clear lines that had been drawn before. And so I don't fault anybody at that. I think it's a good process that's worked really well. We've, had our clear lines and disagreements, but, Chair O'Driscoll is still becoming my new BFF over there. So, but I really do want to just kind of, that is why I'm sorry to so many members who asked for mandate reviews. I know Chair Howard had one, and we were able to get a few in, but we wanted to focus on things that we could get done bipartisanly. And so that's why this motion is necessary, because we knew we would not get it passed, and no GOP member would support extended care to Minnesotans.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I was wondering if the author of this urgency motion would yield. I don't even know who it is. I'm sorry.
The author of the bill is Representative Smith. Representative Smith will yield for a question. Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, I'm just curious, kind of an interesting urgency. Do you know if this bill go through a mandate review this year?
Representative Smith.
Excuse me, sorry, Speaker. To your question, Representative Nadeau, there was a review of a previous version of this bill, but not House File 32 as it currently has its number. It was a previous session.
Representative Nadeau.
And thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Smith. Would you continue will he continue to yield?
Representative Smith will continue to yield. Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, do you have an estimate of what this would cost our insurance market?
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. I have the evaluation is here, so if you want to come see it, because I know it's hard to find at the last minute, I'm happy to show it with you. So the bill itself is limited, so we're not including MA programs, we're not including any of our public programs, so there's not necessarily a fiscal note, although as you know in these evaluations there are specific potential costs that are hard to exactly calculate, for example, in our CGIP program. But those would be paid by premiums, not exactly, obviously, from state budgets. So happy to talk details on that, but the evaluation is here.
Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And if Representative Smith would yield to one more question.
Representative Smith will yield. Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Smith, I haven't read the report, and I will come over and look at that for sure. But can you give the body just a ballpark estimate of what an individual family would be saving by eliminating a copay for this service?
Representative Smith.
Speaker, it depends on the family, obviously, because this is about copays. If I'm understanding your question correctly, I went through sort of in my opening remarks, if a child was given a diagnosis that they need to go once a week to a therapist and then had a monthly meeting for a psychiatric evaluation to continue to make sure that that was the right treatment, copays, again, using averages in the insurance field, would roughly add up over a year to $3,500 for that family.
Representative Nadeau.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Smith. I think it's an important bill, and I'm not sure how far. I don't recall it getting to health. I would have liked to have actually had a discussion in health on this, and maybe it's limited to commerce and it doesn't come to health. But I think trying to get more access to services for children's mental health is really important. I don't know. I'm racking my brain trying to figure out how this would help that happen, and I'm coming up a little short on that. So I'm going to come up. Somebody just sent me the report, so I'll take a look at it. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Further discussion to the motion. Representative Smith.
Thank you, members. I would simply say I think most families in Minnesota, when they're considering medical care, unfortunately have to consider the cost of that care for their family. And if they're considering the cost of mental health treatments for their child, I think all good parents would pay whatever price to help their child through a mental health crisis or other scenario that they may find themselves in. But they have to consider the cost if they have copays for those treatments. So if they don't have to consider that cost, they will access that treatment faster and easier, and the child will get the help that they need. That's the goal of this bill. And honestly, in our discussion today, I've been very encouraged. I have not heard anything against this bill. I've heard a lot of process arguments, which are important, but we talk to Minnesotans all the time. Imagine talking to one of your constituents who said, my child is struggling with seasonal depression, was having suicide ideation, and I had to get him help. Thankfully, they're doing much better now, but I'm in medical debt. Why is that the case? Let's be honest, members, you are not going to say, well, the Commerce Department did not have enough time to hear it, and because the people of Minnesota don't want to hear that. You understand what this bill does. It's a very short bill. And honestly, I know that we are all having conversations with families who have been hurt by gun violence. And I know that you are saying we need to bolster mental health in Minnesota. That's what you're saying. So why isn't that what you're voting for today? I think there are areas of agreement. But agreement can't just be in discussion. It can't just be in words. This place where we work requires votes to use our power for the good of Minnesota. Use your power for the good of Minnesota children and families today. Allow them to not pay copays when they get mental health services for their children.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Momonty Hiltsley.
Yes.
There you go.
I am ready.
Go ahead.
Momonty Hiltsley, yes.
Momonty Hiltsley votes aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 76 ayes and 58 nays, the motion is not adopted. There's a motion at the desk. The clerk will report the motion.
Niska moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File Number 5015 be recalled from the Committee on Education Finance, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. That is my motion, and this is good news for those of you on the other side of the aisle who want to do something to protect young people. This is a bill that's actually been vetted. It's a bipartisan package to protect kids. It has just been reintroduced today, but many of the individual bills were heard. They have bipartisan support, were heard individually and vetted individually, as well as this package was heard as an entire package in the Education Finance Committee earlier this week. Representative Lawrence is the chief author of this bill, and so I defer to Representative Lawrence for further discussion. But first, Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. I recognize a member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence, to your bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm honored to bring this bill to the floor tonight. I think it's an urgent bill that we need to discuss, and that's why we called the urgency today. House File 5015 works to create a safe educational learning environment for all students. All students in every school in the state of Minnesota. If you don't know already, my fundamental goal is simple: protect students in every school. That's the bottom line of this bill. That's what it works to do as I go through the points here today. Some of the key points of the proposal are: one, it provides options for protecting every student in every school. And when I say that, I mean public, charter, non-public, and tribal. This bill does include bipartisan and common sense solutions that are practical and realistic, and I'll go through them in a minute. The options within this bill are multi-layered and flexible to meet the local needs of our school districts. Go through the bill a little bit just so we kind of give everybody a little bit more background as we talk about and discuss the urgency today. There's $50 million in one-time grants in school facility upgrades for public, charter, non-public, tribal schools. This is going to be funded from Northern Lights Express train account. Those dollars be used in that. There's $50 million per year increase in safe school revenue, which is extended also to include public, non-public, charter, and tribal schools. Now what that means is right now the aid is $36 per pupil. The proposal is take that to $68, and this is new funding from the state, not on property taxes. It is proposed $2.5 million per year increase in funding for school-linked mental health grants. It has anonymous threat reporting systems opt-in for schools. This is one item which we had a lot of testimony on as well, but the testimony was from schools that already implement this process. And they came and they said how well it works, and they're already doing it. That's why I proposed, and that's why it's a part of this bill. It's part of keeping kids safe. This bill increases flexibility and local control for student support, personnel, aid, revenue. Okay? Gives schools more flexibility with that funding. Still can be used on the same personnel, but gives them the flexibility to say, are there other things our school needs to invest in as well? There's $500,000 proposed in one-time funding for school safety plans, which is an opt-in. And then there's a K-3 dismissal reform. Now, as was stated by Leader Niska, all these points, everything that I've mentioned has been heard in committee. It's taken testimony, and that's why it's before us tonight. All these provisions right here work in conjunction to provide a safer learning experience for every student in every school in the state of Minnesota. I'm going to reiterate some of the key provisions of this bill and keep it simple. More school safety funding for our public, charter, non-public, and tribal schools. Basic and simple. More funding for student mental health in schools. We just had a discussion for Representative Smith about regarding mental health. This provides it in our classrooms, in our educational systems. More funding for student mental health. Local options for anonymous threat reporting systems and for safe school plans. And finally, student discipline reform to protect teachers, staff, and students. House File 5015 is a bill that I think we all can support. I think we've been called on as representatives to come alongside our schools and help them provide a safer environment in a lot of different areas. Each one of you talked to different students, parents, been mentioned on this House floor, that are asking us to come alongside and assist in providing a safe learning environment for our kids. This bill does that. This is something we can all come alongside and support to make safer schools for all of our students. So I ask you to look hard at this legislation, to evaluate what's been presented before you today, and let's turn that green board. Let's do something on behalf of all of our kids in the state of Minnesota and create a safer learning environment for each one of them. Vote green.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, we did hear this bill as a delete all on Tuesday. And I'm a little disappointed because I thought we had a really good conversation today. And I thought we were finally coming to the table to actually stop playing lobbing bombs at each other, but I guess I was wrong. So here goes. Your bill is not realistic because you make ongoing promises in school safety aid with one-time money. If you look at the appropriations section on page 11 and 12, there's nothing that says any appropriations for 2028. So you promised school safety levy, an increase in aid to our public schools, to our charter schools, to our cooperatives, to non-public schools and tribal schools with one-time money. That is not how you fund schools. That's not realistic. And your bill is not practical because you don't talk about the #1 killer of our students, which is guns. So I'm a little frustrated because we did really have a good conversation today. And I know if Co-Chair Krish and I sat in a room for like 10 hours, we could get this all ironed out. Because last year, he and I made really tough decisions together. We did as a committee. We had to make cuts. We had a cut target to reach. We still funded our K through 12 schools. But we had to slow down some costs that we really cared about in student mental health. And I don't want to make our schools do that again. And you're just shifting deck chairs around. When we put our bill together and thought about it, we don't use NLX as a piggy bank. I agree with you that we should be doing school safety grants. There is a great bill that was in public safety about doing that for the school through the School Safety Center that has expertise in this to do school safety grants. I'd be more than happy to march arm in arm with Co-Chair Krisha into the Ways and Means Chair's offices and ask for that one-time money for the experts at the School Safety Center to help our schools figure out what to do. So I'm just going to share a few statistics so that you folks didn't get a chance to hear this in committee. First of all, just as a quick reminder, in 2023-2024, we did one of the most important bills we've done in a long time for our school kids' safety. We put a whole funding stream together for school counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, and school social workers, folks that work intensely with our students when they're sometimes having the worst days of their lives. And you know why that's important? We learned why it's important through evidence-based research from two of our finest right here in Minnesota who have studied, we're going to talk about this because school safety, everybody thinks about it, a lot of school things about school safety, but most of us think about shootings. School shootings, mass shootings. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Densley from the Violence Prevention Project Research Center have done research over a decade on who these folks are that perpetrate these crimes against our students. School shooters, 57% of them are students in the building. They've gone through the drills. They know how to get around them. 23% former students. They've gone through the drills. They know how to get around them. 80% of them show signs like depression, mood swings, agitation, and isolation right before they attack. And over 90% of them leak their plans to a family or friend. And finally, 59% of them so all of them use guns, but 59% of them borrow or steal their guns from family, friends, or others. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Densley say that all of these facts lead to the need for a layered approach to prevention, which you got a good start on this in this bill. We got a good start on it in ours if we could work together. Since the perpetrators are insiders, we must think beyond locked doors and drills. We need licensed staff with trusted adults in our buildings to understand the signs and are trained in crisis intervention. Since these shooters see their act as the final one, we need to invest in suicide prevention, not punishment for their change of behavior, like you see in the bill before you right now, that repeals the K-3 suspension. K-3, it allows students to be suspended for up to 3 days, doesn't put a limit on how many times that can happen. Just to mind you, if a kid misses 2 days a month in school, they are over and over, they're least likely to graduate in the end. But these are kiddos that are just learning how to do school, and you're telling them they don't belong. That first layer of approach that Dr. Densley and Dr. Peterson talk about is building that network of trusted adults in our schools. And the Student Support Personnel Aid did that. We have more school nurses, more school counselors, more social workers, and social workers and psychologists in our buildings. But we need more. That's why we started to ramp up the funding in 24 and 25, but unfortunately, in 25 and 26, but unfortunately with our budget last year and the cuts we had to make, we made it slow it down. So in the bill we heard today on the floor, in committee, We use one-time money to bump that cost up more for our SSPAs. And what you've got to remember with non-public pupil aid, which I help defend, believe it or not, because I think it's a moral imperative, we have secondary school counselors that go into all our non-public schools. So when we increase this aid, that means more counselors for them too. So that's that first layer. That second layer, that's evidence-based, is something we both agree on. We have it in both of our bills. And that is anonymous threat reporting and school safety plans. The difference is, in your bill, you suggest it. You suggest to the schools that they do it because you're worried about mandates. And you say if they opt, if it's a good idea, schools will opt in. Guess what? Not many of them have. Even though the BCA has an anonymous threat reporting system that's free, so sometimes we do have to tell our schools, you know what, we're serious now, we need to do this. In the plan we have, we give them a few years, but we start the process now. Because kids can't wait, childhood does not have a rewind, and our parents are asking us to keep their kids safe. And then finally, Dr. Densley and Dr. Peterson say that last integral layer of school safety is what we do about weapons used in school shootings. There are sensible gun violence provisions that have been heard in public safety, namely the high-capacity ban on high-capacity magazines and assault rifles. And you all say, like, oh, but that's in another bill. We don't deal with that in K through 12. But contrary to that belief, the Education Committee does have a place in this discussion of gun violence in our schools and in our communities. One of those evidence-based approaches that Dr. Peterson and Dr. Densley suggest is safe storage of guns on school grounds. Representative Green had a bill in public safety and ed policy. You guys all voted it down. So we put it in our bill that we heard today. Members, I would like to have you go to Representative Green. I'll make some final comments later, but I think I should let somebody else take over for a minute.
I recognize the member from Freeborn, Representative Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just trying to look something up quick, but I wasn't able to get to it in time. But I will make my comments concerning this bill. And Representative Lawrence, this is a good bill. It has a lot of bipartisan components in it that we can all agree upon. Today's proposal includes policy provision, including an option for the anonymous threat reporting system that Representative Chair Youakim mentioned, and that empowers schools and the students there to be part of the school safety system. But it does not mandate it. Members, we are mandating our schools to death. I'll rephrase that. We're mandating them into bankruptcy. You know what? Maybe if we didn't have so many mandates on every other little part of micromanaging our school districts, we could mandate a few important things. But we so over-mandate them that they can't handle it anymore. I would bet that most schools are not aware that the BCA has a free anonymous threat reporting system. And I would also bet that if they did know that, and the funding was there, which Sandy Hook Promise offers, that the majority of them would opt into it. Why wouldn't they? It's a good idea. We don't have to mandate good ideas. Our local people are fully capable of making those decisions on what's best for their students and their school and their situation. So I'll say that the proposals that we heard in both education policy and education finance were Democrat proposals, and they were Republican proposals, and I appreciate that. We should act on the ones where we can come into agreement. And I believe those in this Lawrence bill are areas that we can agree upon. Maybe not that we're not mandating it. That's a question for another day after we take away the 65+ mandates that we put onto schools just 2 years ago. So for another conversation. So thank you, Representative Lawrence. I do support this bill, and I hope we will pass this motion to bring it forward today. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Green.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I said this just a couple hours ago. School safety is critical for all students, and it can be defined 1,000 different ways, and it really demands a comprehensive approach. And beyond the critical services and supports that students need in schools, we also need to consider other places where student safety is vulnerable, both at school and the things that put, let me back up for a second. I'm going to say that sentence again. We also need to consider other places where student safety is vulnerable at school and the things that put their safety at risk. Those places, school parking lots and inside school classrooms and buildings, and those things are firearms. I brought legislation today which is about securing firearms when firearms are on school grounds by students. It is straightforward, it is reasonable, it is effective. I was ready and expecting a discussion with my colleagues in Education Finance. Let's talk about it. Talk about any concerns you have, but let's talk about firearms on school grounds. What does that mean? I didn't receive a single question today, not one question. No one was curious. 2 students even came to our committee today. They rushed here after lunch to testify, to race back for 7th period. They shared their fears, their reality, and why this matters to them. They made a plea to all of us. Do what you can do at the minimum to at least make sure that if firearms are on school campuses, they are secure. When they're in parking lots, when we're driving through the parking lots, and that they are not arbitrarily in classrooms that they sit in. Not one comment today. No one in committee wanted to talk about firearms on school grounds and how important and impactful it would be if we require those firearms to be secured. No one asked about the risks that increase when access to unsecured firearms also increases, whether the result is intentional or accidental. No one was curious why the principals and the superintendents support this across the state. They are in favor of this. They said, our school leaders are responsible for safeguarding hundreds of thousands of students and staff every day. However, the presence of firearms on or near school property, particularly when not secured storely, undermine efforts and increases risk. And no one had any comment when Hennepin County Sheriff Witt said this in her letter. This bill establishes uniform firearm storage requirements on school property. This is a clear, practical proposal that will benefit both schools and law enforcement. By creating consistent expectations statewide, the bill makes compliance easier for the public and enforcement more consistent and effective. If it is best practice, why on earth would we not want this in our statute? If we're going to talk and have a real conversation about comprehensive approach to school safety, we have to at least be willing to actually talk about the thing we are protecting our kids from. Those are firearms.
I recognize a member from Washington, Representative DePel.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I wanted to address the commentary that we just heard. I actually had asked in committee to be recognized so I could address what was being brought up, and the entire conversation isn't being represented. Representative Green actually said that we had had a conversation outside of that original bill hearing. That was in education policy. That was weeks ago, and that we would continue to work on something that would work for all schools in Minnesota. And part of that conversation is, and was, that there are students that are at risk of being attacked by individuals who have guns also, and that non-public schools oftentimes don't have the resources to hire a school resource officer or somebody to protect the children from a shooter. And that, of course, is something that we've already talked about, that we want children to be protected from shooters. We don't want our children who are in schools to worry that they're going to be attacked. I don't think anybody on the floor here, any representative, would want that. But we also have to remember that the only person that can protect children from being attacked, if there is an active shooter, is somebody else with the capability to incapacitate that active shooter. And so if we make it impossible for an individual to protect students, we end up with students in classrooms like fish in a bowl. They have no escape. They can be cornered in their classroom like sitting ducks and slaughtered by somebody who has a gun with no ramifications or repercussions. And that is a fact of life. As a co-founder of a school that is in this exact category, we've had 2 individuals in the last 2 weeks show up that were heavily intoxicated, one of which wouldn't leave, and we had to wait for a long time for law enforcement to arrive. That's a reality. That's just reality. I wish I could change the fact that individuals show up at schools in inappropriate ways and sometimes with deadly force, which is tragic and evil and heinous and very distressing. But the fact of the matter is I did want to be recognized to address all of those very important issues. And the fact of the matter is adults that have the ability to defend children at schools should be able to retain that capability. They should be able to defend children. And none of us want those children to be shot and killed by an active shooter. We just had that in Minnesota. And what we should be doing is saying we want protections and measures for all children in every school in Minnesota. Not just some, all children. And we shouldn't say, we think we want to just give funding to these select children over here, even though we just had a shooting at a school that the other side of the aisle has repeatedly kept funding away from. Republicans have over and over said, we want to fund school safety for all schools. And then we see a bill come back from the other side of the aisle, and we notice that something's gone. Something's missing from those bills. That's the other students in Minnesota who also need to be protected. I think it really needs a hard thought and look. Do we really want to fund protections for all students in Minnesota, or do we only want to protect some students? Do we want to take away the ability for an adult to protect students, or do we want to make it harder for them to do that? And then do we really want to grandstand on the House floor and say that we didn't have a conversation about this and that nobody wanted to talk about it when that clearly is not the case? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Mauer, Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, members, for this conversation, and thank you, Representative Lawrence, for your bill. As a teacher for over 20 years, many of the provisions that we are talking about are specifically pointed to what I do and also very personal to me. When we talk about making sure that we have funding for our schools to make sure that they can use it for what they want, making sure that they are able to use it for the needs that they can use it for. Not us deciding how they get to use, but they look at how they can meet the needs of their specific district and their specific students. when we talk about how we want to protect all students, I agree with many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that say that student safety is important for all students. And yet every bill we look at from the other side of the aisle intentionally, specifically leaves out students who choose to go to other schools. Intentionally and specifically chooses to leave them out. This bill includes them. I have the PowerPoint from Sandy Hook Promise that we keep citing. I have that, where they talk about what works is proactive prevention. And they listed off 3 buckets of limited or no evidence base, developing evidence base, and evidence base. And evidence base is anonymous reporting with training. Evidence-based is being able to look at life skill and anti-bullying programs, trauma-informed responses, resiliency and orientation, after-school and youth empowerment programs. Money in this bill that all can be used for that. All of that can be used for it. One of the things they talk about is non-exclusionary discipline. And if you talk to any teacher in this room, including Representative Bakeberg and me, you will talk about the value of using restorative practices. We will hear and we talk about how important those are. But what you will not hear from very many practicing teachers is the idea that we take tools out of the toolbox. And this carte blanche prohibition is not working for our schools. And we hear it when I listen to the principal's survey report. What they talked about all over the place was, listen, we loved the READ Act. We thought it was great because you were able to give us training, you were able to give us funding. But man, we're really struggling with this, the non-exclusionary discipline prohibition. Not because we disagree with restorative practices. We love restorative practices. We think it's great. And over my 20 years of teaching, I can count on one hand how many students I've sent out of the room. But we don't understand what you're talking about. We don't have the training for it, and we don't have the money to be trained. And so the provisions here in this bill say, could you just let us have a tool that gives us time? And then could you please train us? Could you please help us understand? Because non-exclusionary discipline, I call it NED for short because it's really hard to say that over and over again. NED is hard to define. It's different for me, for mom, for grandma, for superintendent over there, and for anyone else who is in this conversation. It's defined differently. And so we need to have that conversation. This money can go for training and understanding what that is. And then let's just talk about the role of MDE. MDE's job is to be the person that guides and helps our schools. We have independent school districts for a reason, because the people who are elected on the school boards are the people that are actually in the district, paying the taxes, doing the things that go and live among the schools and the students and the teachers every single day. There's independence for a reason. Because Austin is different from Mille Lacs, different from Prior Lake, and different from Medina. MDE is supposed to be the place where schools can go to and get ideas and get direction, get guidance. And we have said multiple times, we've talked about how they have been lax in their duty for chronic absenteeism, lax in their duty on science of reading, lax in their duty for lots of other things. And all we're asking here is for MDE to say, okay, this is how to do an evidence-based strategy for anonymous reporting. And when we give you some direction and some funding stream, you're going to go and do it. And you will. Arkansas was able to put a challenge out to their schools and say, listen, if you want to help do this innovation, this idea that I think there was talking about cell phones in schools, here's a pot of money. Here's a pot of money for cell phones in school, for getting rid of cell phones in school, or here's a pot of money to deal with chronic absenteeism. You tell us how it will work best in your district, we'll help you do it. It's incentivizing innovation. It's not mandating, it's incentivizing innovation. That's what this bill does. That's what this bill does. This bill has the ability to be able to provide the funding and the flexibility and the guidance for our schools so that they are able to create, as my colleagues across the aisle say, safe schools, because they believe that safe schools is important for all students. One of my other colleagues across the aisle today said that it's important for us to be on record to know who wants to keep our students safe. Well, we want to keep all students in every school safe. Here's guidance and funding to be able to do that. Here's a way for you to be able to say that you believe what you're actually saying. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I ask for you to vote green.
I recognize the member from Scott, Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and members, for a good discussion. And I think we can all agree that one of the top priorities coming into session was to make sure that kids were safe in school, to do whatever we could do to make sure that kids are safe in every single school. All kids, all schools, regardless of where they go. That has been my priority coming in and will continue to be. Representative Lawrence outlined very well what the bill does, so I'm not going to go into that, but we have to understand that there is no single solution to address school safety. There's no single solution, and all of the research says that you need a multi-layered approach, or a layered approach to make sure this happens. And in our discussion on Tuesday, our discussion today, I think we're pretty close on the anonymous threat reporting. Right now, our schools are struggling financially. We cannot put more stress on their already stressed budgets. I just want to explain what will happen if we pass more mandates on them that have a fiscal impact. Budgets are set. So that means that school boards will have to go back and eliminate more teachers for next year, because the enactment date on these different bills really matter. I want to also talk, Representative Green. You worked with students, so thank you for bringing that. I actually agree with you. It is not the principal's responsibility. The principal should not have the authority to allow someone to carry in a school. That is a superintendent's. For any principal that would do that, number one, they're sailing out on a ship alone and is a huge mistake. In my 25 years, I've never heard of a principal doing that. What I have heard of is superintendents want the ability if they choose to do it. So yes, there were letters from the different associations, but I heard directly from superintendents. Directly from superintendents saying, I want the authority to do that. I want to also talk about the actual impact in a school around the K-3 discipline. And Chair Joachim, you talked about punishment. Behavior is communication. So when a student is acting out, that is a form of communication. Our youngest learners often communicate with behavior. Our educators do an amazing job of using tools like restorative practices, PBIS, to teach kids appropriate behaviors in different environments. That happens all the time, every day, where it's being taught and retaught Part of teaching kids behavior is accountability. They need to learn that there is accountability. So we had Anoka Hennepin come in and testify. We all care about our kids. We all care about our teachers. Anoka Hennepin shared in committee on Tuesday. They also sent a letter last year on April 16th. And they expressed the concerns about the educational impact of the ban on K-3 suspensions. What happened in 23 is they took the trifecta, to be very blunt, took a tool away from principals to keep kids safe. A last resort tool, but it is an important tool. So far this year, the Anoka Hennepin School District, they've had 133 evacuations of their classrooms. 133. So I want you to imagine that if this is a classroom, our desks are overturned, computers are thrown, papers are thrown all over, and that teacher has to get the rest of the students, the rest of the 25 or 30 kids in an elementary classroom, that's the reality because of budgets, and they move them to the hallway. And then the teacher has to pretend that that just didn't happen to try to care for the kids and try to teach them math. So that's happened 133 times in Anoka Hennepin. The other stat that they shared is that they have 157 work comp claims, 110 at the K-3 level. That means teachers are being hurt. Let that sink in. That is going to have a fiscal impact on the district as well as a huge human impact. And I want to be clear about this idea of punishment. It is very clearly laid out, the process that a principal has to go through in order to suspend a student. It's in the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act. There are clear guidelines on the amount of time, the amount of days that a student can be suspended. If they're a special education student, it's clearly laid out. So I just falsely reject the idea and what was said on the floor that there's no limit to the number of times. That is just false. And I'm going to end with this. And Representative Mueller actually talked about it. There is a complete lack of leadership on the part of the Department of Education in this area. I've been asking for clarity on this law for over a year. And they continue to send ambiguous messages. Representative Rayrauer, Representative Joachim, in committee on Tuesday said that the department needed to provide clarity. There were questions around this. So there was a first grader, let that sink in, think of a first grader, that lit a fire in the bathroom in a school. School's evacuated, a couple $1 million in damage to that school. That principal testified this week. I asked, that kid was back in school the next day. They were not able to suspend that student. Now the advocates will say, oh no, you got to put that student in a different place. No duh. Like, we're going to process through what happened. But schools have limited resources, so there are not other places for kids to go. So I ask you, this provision got a lot of attention, but the educators across the state are begging you to listen to what is happening. 110 work comp claims in Anoka Hennepin. Those are teachers, those are educators being hurt by kids. We talk a lot about retention and growing our workforce. It starts with respecting educators. It starts with respecting educators. Vote green.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, these conversations, as I'm trying not to count down the days as we get toward the end of the session, and I won't be in these chambers anymore to have these debates and listen to these debates. These conversations are tough because I feel like I know as long as I've been here, we've been having these conversations prior to us passing the legislation, then after we passed the legislation to try to protect those most precious to us, which I believe is one of our core functions here as state legislators. And I think what we've done, we've really tried very hard to do that. And when I hear us talk about protecting all of our kids, regardless of they're in our public schools or charter schools, gun violence protection is a key function of that. I don't know how we have this debate without including action on the very tools, and I know you're going to get tired of me saying this, but without including action to prevent people from having these type of weapons that can cause mass tragedies. I don't know how we don't have that conversation as part of this. I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me that we should be having that conversation as part of this, especially if we're talking about protecting all of our kids. If we're saying we're going to prevent mass tragedies and create a place for our kids to be safe, we should be talking about the weapons that cause the mass tragedies. I don't care if you have someone else with a gun in the building. If someone shows up with multiple assault weapons and multiple high-capacity magazines, they're not going to be a match for that individual. And right now, we are asking our educators to put their bodies on the line to protect our kids. That is a reality. That is the training that our educators receive right now. That is what we're asking our educators to do. We're already asking them to do that. And when we have these debates, I feel like we're not actually talking about the real issue. And the real issue is that we have a gun problem in this country. We really do. I'm fine with people that want to use weapons for sports, but we're talking about people that are using these weapons to destroy lives of someone that got up in the morning in a good mood, dressing their kids, getting them breakfast, dropping them off at the bus stop, and then later they get a call that their kid is gone. That is the tragedy that's happening around this country, and most recently in our state. And we're debating about these type of things as if we don't know what the root cause issue is, as if we don't know what the tools are, and as if we don't have a solution, as if our hands are tied, that we can't do anything. And we all know that's not true. We all know that we can do something. And I sound like a broken record because I say it every time. We, all of us with election certificates, can do something. We've heard testimony and debates, and we continue to have testimony from parents that are saying, please do something. Please stop the next tragedy. Please do not make any other parent a part of the club that I'm in. We can do something about that. We're talking about our kindergarten students as if they're hardened criminals, as they're the most violent beings that we have in this state. We're talking about 5-year-olds. We're talking about young people. That we need to have tools to protect ourselves from 5-year-olds. That we can't protect ourselves from 5-year-olds. We can do better than this. These are not the debates we should be having right now. We should be talking about how we can remove the root cause issue to protect our kids. We have the ability to do that. We have election certificates. People sent us here to do things that will make their lives a little bit easier, make their lives a little bit more affordable, make their lives a little bit safer, protect their kids, the most precious things that many of us have. I feel like these debates miss the point every time. Every single time I feel like these debates miss the point. And then we're going to get a bunch of emails, and rightfully so, we deserve them, from parents that have lost their kids, saying, what are you going to do? You're debating about the wrong things. We're asking you to help. We're asking you to prevent the next tragedy. And then we'll have another debate. We'll list off the same talking points, and we don't do anything. And we're just waiting for the next tragedy to happen, because it will happen. Because the people that know that they can continue to have access to those weapons and those high-capacity magazines, they may or may not watch these debates, but what they do know and what they will find is that when they show up in that gun shop to buy that weapon, they can still buy it. Then they'll strap it on, they'll show up on a school property, and they will commence mayhem. And then we'll have another debate. These debates aren't saving lives. These debates aren't making anyone safer. Just getting us airtime. But they're not saving anybody. And again, we have the ability to save lives. We should use the power that we have to save lives, not to waste our time debating about things that aren't going to save lives. So again, I'm imploring everybody, got an election certificate for a reason. I know you care. Let's use it. Let's save lives. And let's not demonize our youngest kids. Let's not demonize our youngest kids. Because not only do we want to make them safe in that environment, but we also don't want to treat them like criminals. We don't want to treat them like they can't have the best outcomes. We should create the space for that. And I feel like these debates are not doing that. We're missing the mark here, and we can do better. Just one fact before I go. We talk about suspensions and we talk about seclusions. Since we've implemented these laws and we're still collecting data because there's a lag on it, we've actually seen some of the behavior and the harm that's been happening before we implemented the law. We're seeing those decrease. So these laws are actually working. They're actually creating better environments for our kids and for our educators. And I know there may be one-offs, but we have to look at the data. That's why we asked them to collect the data. We have to look at the data. And if the data is saying that we're going in the right direction, creating better environments for our kids to learn, better environments for our educators to work in, we should be finding ways to lean into that, scale it up, not repeal it, and go back to what we had before. Because we'll just be back here having the same debate. That's a waste of our time, it's a waste of the taxpayers' times, and it's also not creating the best environments for our kids or our educators to do their job the best. Yeah.
I recognize a member from Chisago, Representative Reimer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and specifically Representative Lawrence for bringing this bill. I think this is a very important bill, and what a message to Minnesota it would be if we could get this thing passed to say we are serious about the safety of our kids and how hard our schools are as targets for any criminal that's looking to perpetrate a horrible crime. You know, I found it ironic that the bill that we heard before this, it seemed to be, I think I heard that the process and procedure, it was so important that we needed to ignore the process and procedure to get that last bill heard. And yet the biggest hang-up on this bill seems to be procedural in nature. Because I had heard that we don't do things like take money from the NLX, a failed train project, to fund a bill like this. It's not the way that we do things. That's what I just heard. Sounds like a procedural thing to me. Except we did that last year. We took money from a failed train project during the nigh hours of last year in order to fund unemployment insurance for hourly school workers. So when Representative Lawrence has a bill that says we have a creative way to fund school safety, fundamental, proven things, and I have a pot of money that's just sitting there burning a hole in my pocket to get that funded, I think that's creative. I think that's good. I think it's something that we should embrace and look at statewide. After all, we've kind of spent ourselves into a pretty significant deficit. We still have a deficit in 4 years. And when I think about ways that we fund our personal household, our personal lives, when there's an emergency, when there's something that needs to be done, you take money from one area of your life to apply it to that more urgent area of your life. And Representative Lawrence, I commend you for looking into that funding to fund an initiative like this. For all schools, safety for all schools. And we were just about to hear today in Education and Finance how the governor wants to cut another $50 million of non-public school aid. Friends, Annunciation was a non-public school. And we need to keep that in mind as we're having these debates, having these conversations about what it looks like to keep all of our kids safe. This idea that we can't take from a train project that's failing anyway to fund a measure like this is a 5-alarm fire. This is what Minnesotans are expecting of us. So to have a procedural question about not taking money from a train project to fund the stuff that's important, I think we're about to find out how serious we all are about keeping our kids safe today. And I hope Minnesota is watching. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the member from Sherburne, Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the representatives that shared that on the bill and the provisions of this bill. Couple things. If school safety isn't an urgency, I don't know what is. School safety is definitely an urgency. The people of Minnesota, the residents of Minnesota, the kids of Minnesota have said this is an urgency, and that's what's before us today. I want to put out a couple things. One, a couple provisions that I want to reiterate. More school safety funding for our public, charter, non-public tribal schools. More funding for student mental health in schools. And I want to put a correction out there as far as the bill goes, a suggestion that was made. And if you have the bill before you, if you have it pulled up on the computer, page 11 starts out with the bottom of page 11, safe school aid. Okay, goes to the page, top of page 12, safe school aid. $44,588,000 ongoing funding. That's ongoing funding. It was iterated that that's not ongoing funding. You go down to line 12.5, $50 million, one-time spending. We reference where those dollars are coming from. One-time appropriation. Minnesota School Safety Center, okay? You go down to line 1211, $500,000, one-time funding. And it was mentioned that we need to work with the Department of Public Safety's Minnesota. It's listed right there on the line 12.8. Minnesota School Safety Center for transfer to the Department of Public Safety's Minnesota School Safe Center. Listed right there in this bill. Go down to line 12.6, which refers to school-linked behavioral health grants. $2.5 million ongoing funding. The ongoing funding in this bill is beginning in future year 2028. It's $52.5 million a year. So as it was inferenced earlier that this isn't ongoing, these dollars are ongoing. Yeah, I listed the two that are the one time, but this funding is ongoing, okay? And today as we go forward, and we've had a lot of good commentary, a lot of good discussion, and I appreciate that. But in the discussion, I think one of the things that's key, and if I get it wrong, Chair Joachim and Rep. Green, I think both of you made reference to this and commented, no one-size-fits-all solution to, there's no one-size-that-fits-all solution to school safety. I agree. That's why there's flexibility in this bill. That's why it's designed the way it is. That's why it's got a lot of different factors. Not one size fits all of our schools, but all of our schools deserve, all of our students, every student, every school deserves a safe school, a safe learning environment. And so with that and those couple corrections, today we're voting on an urgency. School safety is an urgency. And I'm going to vote yes. I think it's an urgency. Today I think it's an urgency. I think I put forth a solid bill that moves us. It probably doesn't do everything that we want to do, but it starts our stepping and our walking in the right direction to address school safety and our students in the state of Minnesota. And so join me today. I ask you to turn the board green so that we can continue to move this bill off of the urgency and onto the general registry to discuss providing safe schools for every student in our state. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, members. So members, what we have in front of us is A motion to suspend the rules to declare an urgency. And I want to speak to that motion. I want to speak to a green vote on that, on some of the points of the bill that we would get to, Representative Lawrence's bill. But I want to speak to that and why actually passing that motion would make sense. From the time that I've been here, we used to have a free-for-all of amendments on the House floor. That has changed. We're now at a point where, because we have tied our own hands for these, we actually retreat to positions where we can't find compromise. I actually think by moving this forward and taking us back to where we could do amendments and on the fly, and we could start having this, we as the body, because it is the will of the body that moves votes, not either party. And by supporting the motion that we have in front of us, the NISCA motion, we could get to that, and we could use that as a legitimate procedure to get to a compromise in a time that we're not finding compromise at all. At a time when we're retreating to burying things in rules, or not getting targets, or not moving this. And what we're doing is we're finding all of the reasons why we can't actually help the schools and the kids. That's not why I ran. And every one of us that has an election certificate comes to this floor with those voices that you heard that got you here, that brought you here. And you're representing them. That is the very essence of our job. So the one thing we could do is suspend the rules, declare the urgency, and then get to the heart of the matter of where is the compromise that's hidden in there. Because the compromise we're not seeing is the governor's plan to cut $50 million more from special education. The governor's plan to leave out kids that he talks about, but he won't talk to and help solve their problems. The governor who said, I will call a special session to get this done, with the only power, but he can't follow through. Members, we can follow through as 134 members. We can suspend the rules. We can get to that. We can bring the bill up for its third reading. We can write the amendments. We can get to those compromises, and we can send this on to a governor that simply doesn't have the courage to take this further. So members, the Lawrence bill that you have in front of you, we have lots that we should discuss. There's lots of good things here. As you've heard, we heard a bill in committee today that also was a response to that with school safety ideas. My earliest gavel was starting off with school safety. And that happened on February 21st. The very first gavel we had in, we started that discussion, and here we are ending it. I was asked in a press conference, should something on this get done? My exact quote was, if we do not do this and my head hits the pillow after session is closed, there's a great sadness that I'll feel. This is achievable. This is reachable. We can talk about all the semantics. We can talk about all the procedures, mandates, not mandates. As I said in committee, the biggest reason I don't support mandates is because it is not our job to tell the schools and their communities how to get to safer schools. We can provide the resources, but we need to let them ultimately put the right solutions in that fix it for them. Because when we create mandates and when we create restrictive funds, we take tools away from them. Many schools could have solved this on their own already. There are funds sitting in restricted accounts that schools cannot activate because of mandates that we put on them. Dollars that could be used for this. So members, we have prioritized school safety since day one. And throughout this session, we've been eager to work to find a solution. I believe there's a common sense solution out there. Once we get off this House floor and as people talk, there are conversations going on amongst all the members saying, hey, I think we could get there. It's right there. But it's not there if we can't take the first step, which is let's declare the urgency. If there has ever been an urgency, this is one that I believe in, and then we can get to the next step. So I would recommend a green vote on the Niska motion to suspend the rules and declare an urgency.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have heard that this bill would be providing ongoing funding, but I just wanted to set the record straight. If you actually read the bill, it does not designate any funding after 2027. It establishes appropriations just for 2027. Looks like we're taking money from nurses and psychologists to do that, but promising money for students without any ongoing appropriations is not solving the problem. Look, we want to work together, and we don't want to do this a la carte. We want to do this in a comprehensive way. We support helping schools with safety. We support a comprehensive approach that includes school safety plans, that includes anonymous threat reporting, that includes student support personnel aid for counselors and psychologists. And yes, that includes action on gun violence. You all held a press conference earlier this week on this bill, and you were asked by reporters, the public wants action on gun violence. Why aren't you willing to act? And you said, oh, well, we should just act on the things that we can all agree on. Well, guess what? Minnesotans agree that we should act on gun violence prevention. 69% support acting on assault weapons. 64% support action on high-capacity magazines. It would take one vote, one person, and then we would agree, right? Then we would get to a place where we could actually act together. And you all have talked about, well, let's do what works. Guess what? Banning high-capacity magazines, banning assault weapons that kill more kids, that shoot more bullets at a higher velocity, works. 57% more people are killed when a high-capacity magazine is used. 85% of mass shooting deaths are the result of assault weapons. And we're not just trying to protect kids in school settings, we're trying to protect kids wherever they are. Wherever these weapons of war might be used in our streets and in our communities, we are trying to protect kids there. So yes, let's work on school safety across the board. Let's work together, but let's not ignore what the Minnesota public is asking us to do, and that is act on guns.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I hope we can all agree. I trust we can all agree. Every student deserves to be safe in school. Every teacher deserves to be able to focus on teaching, not worry about what threat might be coming next. And I hope we can all agree that that premise applies to every student and every teacher in every school in Minnesota. Public schools, tribal schools, charter schools, and yes, non-public schools, no matter what Education Minnesota says or wants. Members, last year, we were all shocked and saddened when a deranged and evil individual attacked Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis and tragically killed 2 students with their entire lives ahead of them, injured 28 others. I know that all of our hearts remain broken for those families, for the Annunciation family, for every family in Minnesota, every parent in Minnesota who sent their kids to school that day and had to worry about the same thing happening in their school. As we grieved, and yes, as we prayed, we all did ask the same question: what can we do to stop this from happening again? We have an answer to that question before us today. It might not be the answer all of us want, but it is a common sense proposal with bipartisan common sense proposals, including more school safety funding for all schools. And Leader Long, I know neither of us sit on the Education Finance Committee, but if you did, you would know that what you just said was false. And Representative Kresha, I believe, is sending around the House Fiscal Analysis spreadsheet that was given out to everyone in the Education Finance Committee when they looked at this, which shows that, in fact, it does have ongoing school safety funding. And not just for the schools that Education Minnesota wants funded, for all schools, including non-public schools like Annunciation. And we need to do that. It includes stronger mental health support, not an insurance mandate that hasn't been vetted, but actual mental health support that will help. It includes local tools like anonymous threat reporting and better safety planning, and it includes discipline policies that protect students and staff, because our schools are telling us they need it to keep their students safe. These aren't new ideas. Many of them are bipartisan ideas. So all of us need to ask, and all Minnesotans need to ask, for ideas like this, for bipartisan, practical ideas, why wouldn't everyone vote yes? Members, every day we delay action on these bipartisan solutions, we are making a choice to wait, a choice to do nothing. Students and families aren't asking us to solve everything. You've said the same thing when it comes to discussions about gun control, which we know are not going to solve everything. When we're on those bills, you'll acknowledge that, but now you pretend like that is the only solution. That is the right solution, and we can't even talk about other solutions unless we first agree to do some gun ban that wouldn't have prevented this horrible crime from happening in the first place. It is true that this debate will not save any lives. No debates save lives. The debate about gun control doesn't save lives. But what will save lives is this bill. Passing this bill. Green votes on this bill. That's what we can do. And this is an urgency, and we heard that urgency in 2023. From the advocates trying to protect every school like Annunciation. In 2023, in the aftermath of the Covenant school shooting in Nashville, leaders representing more than 70,000 non-public school students in Minnesota wrote to the governor asking for funding like the funding that's in this bill. In that letter, they said, quote, "The tragedy from last week at Covenant School must never happen in Minnesota or in our country again." That's what they said, asking for school funding like this bill, school safety funding like this bill in 2023. They said, don't let something like what happened in Covenant School happen in Minnesota. Because, quote, "We need to ensure that all schools have the resources to respond to and prevent these attacks from happening to our schools." Members, that letter happened, unfortunately, when there was a Democrat trifecta. There was an $18 billion surplus. There was plenty of money. Democrats were about to pass a budget to increase state spending by 40%, 40%. But not a dollar of that $18 billion surplus could find its way to non-public schools like Annunciation for the school safety funding that they were asking for, so that something like what happened in 2023 in Nashville wouldn't happen in Minnesota. And I'll be honest, after last fall, I was hopeful that that plea would not fall on deaf ears again. The people of Minnesota are going to see, they're going to hear what happened. And they're going to see, the people of Minnesota are going to watch. Are you going to listen now in 2026 to what they asked for in 2023? Or not? We can't wait for another tragedy to happen before we give all schools in Minnesota the resources they need. Members, we just need a few courageous Democrats to say to Education Minnesota, I don't care if you want to defund private schools. I don't care if you don't care about Minnesota students being safe just because of whether their parents choose that the best educational option for them is a non-public school. We can pass this funding tonight. Members, this motion is simple. It is a simple step to move forward and say, we can set aside what we don't agree on, but this we do agree on. Every student in every school should stay safe. We can take a step towards that by voting for this motion, take up this bill, pass this bill tonight. Members, vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the name of the member participating remotely.
Momani Hiltzley.
Momani Hiltzley, no.
Momani Hiltzley votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 63 ayes and 68 nays, the motion does not prevail. Announcements by the Speaker.
Announcement by the Speaker. A message from the Senate has been received requesting concurrence by the House to amendments adopted by the Senate to the following House files. House File number 3467 and House File number 3718.
Announcements. I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Johnson P.
Thank you, Speaker. I just want to let members know that former Representative Mike Yaros passed away on Monday. Representative Yaros served in the House from 1973 to 81 and then decided to come back in 85 and serve till 2009. I've had the pleasure to get to know him a little bit over the last few years. I know some of the folks in this body served with him in that time. He was just a really unique individual who immigrated to this country and really gave it everything he had. He dedicated a huge portion of his life to making this state better for the people that live here. It's an honor to serve in the same district that he served, but Rep. Hansen let me know the other day I also occupy the same seat that he occupied here on the floor. So thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, I just respectfully ask for a moment of silence to honor the legacy and work of Representative Mike Yaros.
Members, please stand as we observe a moment of silence in memory of former Representative Yaros. Further announcements? I recognize a member from Olmsted, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Speaker. Members, the Rochester Chamber of Commerce invites you to the Downtowner. Until 6:30 is when that's there, so we can hurry over there and hear more about the fastest growing city of the first class in Minnesota. You're all invited.
Further announcements. Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Democrats, we will be caucusing in our caucus room immediately upon adjournment.
Further announcements. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 1 p.m. Monday, April 20th, 2026.
Representative Niska moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 1 o'clock p.m. Monday, April 20th, 2026. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Representative Niska.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Niska moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 1 o'clock p.m. Monday, April 20th, 2026.